Laker fans, stand up. You finally have a podcast that represents you. Make sure you check out Lakers Reign podcast with yours truly, Nick Hamilton. Every week, we have the latest news on the purple and gold and what's going down on the court.
This is Mitchell.
This is Jay Moore.
This is Greg Proops.
This is Gabby Reese.
This is Nate Boyer.
This is Hilliard Guest.
This is Nathan
This
East.
is Rob Bell.
This is J.R. Robinson.
This is Dan Stone.
This is Dr. Bob Greenberg.
Hey, this is John Leon Guerrero.
Hey, I'm Mark Valley.
Hey, and this is Pete A. Turner.
Hi there, this is Robert Coombs coming to you from Brooklyn, New York, and you're listening to The Break It Down Show.
And now, The Break It Down Show with John Leon Guerrero, Mark Valley, and Pete A. Turner.
Hey, Robert, thanks so much for coming on. John and I have been talking about your article that you posted up. I saw it on LinkedIn. Now, did you put it up somewhere else at all, or is LinkedIn the spot where it came from?
So I posted it on LinkedIn, but the reality is it's been around for a few months, and just about every single day, someone new posts it, starts a new conversation. So it's been really exciting to see how that's been received by people.
So give us the backstory for our listeners. You are in the midst of transitioning in your career. You were the director at a national nonprofit, and you've had a great time there, but it's time to do something new. And so tell us about what you did.
Yeah, so this is a little bit of the cliff notes from the article, but also some of my experience since then. For my whole career, I've worked in nonprofits, I've worked in the public sector, I've worked with state and federal government. About a year ago, I started to realize that the work that I'd been doing in my most recent organization, I'd just accomplished almost everything that I'd set out to do. I'd built a number of teams, and each of those teams was really successful, populated with creative and really efficient staff. I got to the point where they were all so much better at their jobs than I could coach them into being, that I realized the only thing that was left for me to do was get out of their way. You know, having a successful career in the nonprofit world, there's other nonprofits that I could have easily transitioned to. But for the longest time, I've been really interested in transitioning to the tech sector. And so I started to apply to dream jobs at big, well-known companies. And I kind of got radio silence. I started thinking, traditionally you're supposed to send a resume and a customized cover letter and all these things. And I like efficiency, so I decided to automate some of that stuff. In fact, I created a bot that applies to jobs for me. It finds jobs on the internet, brings them all into a little database that I created, and then it customizes a cover letter and a resume and sends that out. It applies to those jobs. And so the story that I told was really just about what I learned when this bot went out into the world and applied to. Back then, it was something on the order of 3,000 jobs.
Now, you're talking about 3,000 jobs, though, Robert, that fit your criteria. So the bot replicated your process as if you were looking at something and said, oh, wow, this is me. This is my education. This is my background. I'm a perfect fit for this job. It wasn't just blasting, right?
Yeah, so I'll sort of split the difference with you. It was definitely not quite as precise as I would have been. But when you're talking about that kind of a brute force approach, precision really isn't the thing that you're looking for. It's actually, no human being could manually apply to those 3,000 jobs in the time that this thing did. And so the more likely case was that this was going to find jobs I never would have known about, that I never had time to apply for. And by sheer volume of numbers, something had to come through. Something had to be the right fit. And I gave it some pretty strict parameters, the types of jobs I was looking for, places to look, specific titles. But there were definitely some things on the edges that may not have been the best fit. But the goal really was to put jet fuel into my job search process.
Yeah, let me back you up a little bit too. So you're doing what people would do. Like they might take a flyer on a job that's like, this may not be a perfect fit, but I'm excited about this. I mean, it sounds like you've built some of that into your, just as far as the opportunity accumulation piece goes. You've not wanted to neck it down so far that you're missing things that may be interesting. Is that fair?
It is fair. And I don't want to be revisionist in how I describe this. What I'll tell you now is that it started out pretty fast and loose. It was a little experimental, and I was just trying to figure out how to do this thing. And what I ended up seeing in the results was I found a whole lot of companies that I never would have known about otherwise. I definitely wouldn't have had the time or taken the time to apply to those jobs. And it definitely led to some really interesting conversations that probably wouldn't have happened otherwise. But that's not really all I found. And I think the thing that's really interesting that you guys saw in the Fast Company article, not the ways in which it was successful, but the ways that it was a total and complete failure. That realization happened pretty quickly. Originally, I thought that this was going to turn my job search into like a fire hose of job offers. And almost immediately, I saw that in the same way that I was getting kind of radio silence when I was doing jobs one at a time, I was getting almost the same ratio of radio silence when I'm applying to jobs by the hundreds or thousands. So certainly I was getting more responses, but they were still all automated responses. There were relatively few companies that had human beings that were responding.
So when you say that you started to notice failure, it wasn't failure of the process it wasn't that what you had written or the way that you had programmed the jobs that were coming in and what it was responding to, or the way that it was responding was failing. That was doing okay. You're just talking about the results. You didn't get anything back.
Yeah, I actually started out thinking that I was going to build a robot to find me a job. And it turns out that what I had created was a robot that gathers data about just how hard it is to find a job. So the thing that I was seeing is, all of these automated response, and you guys know how it is where, you get a data point here or a data point there, and it doesn't really mean a lot until you see a whole lot of that data aggregated together and it starts to tell a story. And that's what I started to see. I started to see a story of, it's kind of funny, my robot talking to other robots. It was when you started to see all of the automated responses where like the instant that my resume was received, I got an instantaneous email back and then nothing ever again. Or I would get these emails long after the fact, but sometimes in batches where I knew that my robot had gone out and applied to a whole bunch of jobs, perhaps multiples at a certain organization. And then a month later, I would get 2 different emails from the exact same organization within a couple of seconds of each other saying, we thought you were a really great candidate, but we've decided to go in a different direction. And it's that kind of stuff that when you start to see those patterns emerge, you realize these aren't human beings that are operating. These are other robots, essentially my algorithm working with other algorithms, and they're just sort of blasting data at each other. That was the beginning of me realizing that there was another story.
But let's get a little bit more clarity on the process too, because I'm going to speak for the audience in general. Like, wait a second, you can't build a robot to do these things. You're supposed to have a customized cover letter. You're supposed to customize your resume to the specific position. You're supposed all these things that you're trying to do. Can you talk about how you calibrated your robot to answer these things?
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly right. And if I heard someone else telling this story, I would be sort of quietly critiquing them about how ignorant this approach was. And of course, a robot can't find you a job. That's a personal process. Monster.com and every other job site tells you you have to create a resume that's tailored to the specific company and to that specific job, that you should have an inspiring cover letter that tells about why you're interested in that particular company. Well, the reality is anyone who's done the job search process knows that they begin to have the same patterns about how they customize those things. So, for example, if I'm applying to a whole bunch of director of communications jobs, well, I know that most of my resume is going to look the same based on how I structure it for director of communications jobs. There might be little tweaks that I would do, but by and large, I want to make sure that that language is speaking to that specific type of position. So while it may have been a little bit rougher around the edges, that was the approach that I took in automation. I created a whole bunch of resumes that fit the different classes of jobs that I was willing to entertain. And then I had this cover letter builder that personalized every single cover letter to the specific hiring manager, mentioned them by name, customized it to the specific job and company, mentioned those by name, and then had a number of other different variables that it would try to have some targeted language that says why it is that my experience fits what they're looking for. So again, I mean, this wasn't like individual artisanal cover letter writing, but it was pretty close to the same thing that I would have done in my own approach, as I'm dropping in different sort of sections of boilerplate language based on the thing that I know fits that particular role.
Well, for our listeners, again, who are looking at this process and going, well, wait a minute, why would you really do it that way? You would really do it that way. If you're writing cover letters manually to a bunch of different people, you're going to take the same message and customize it by individual name, company name, position, and then that's just going to save you keystrokes. In your case, though, your customization wasn't just about saving keystrokes. After a while, you started to get that data back, and suddenly your saving keystrokes was also taking away variables, so you really could get the story. I'm a private investigator and have been for a few years, but earlier in my career, I was a database marketer. So I understand the notion of taking away as many variables as you can so that you can allow the little blips to start to tell you the story back. So when you did that, at what point did you have, I imagine it wasn't a revelation, but there was some point at which you went, okay, this isn't a job search. Like you said, you started to listen to the story as opposed to looking for the result. How long in did it take you to get there?
Well, I wish I knew earlier in the process because I might have done things a little bit differently. But what ended up happening, I treated this like any other problem that I would face in my professional career. I had a thesis and I wanted to test it, right? So I went out thinking, okay, if you just sort of customize these things, the law of large numbers says that someone's going to find these letters interesting enough to call in for an interview. And the reality is that did happen. I got a lot of interviews out of this, but those were primarily from relatively small companies. Almost nobody over the size of, say, 50 to 75 staff. Certainly the upward limit would be like maybe 100. No company over that size got back to me at all, even though by volume, they were actually the largest number of companies that I applied to. And that's when I started to realize something was going on. And so I wanted to test some variables. I did what many of your audience is going to recognize. It's called A/B testing. And the idea is you switch up, you keep all of the other things pretty much the same, but you switch up the subject line in your email, or you change out certain pieces of content and see if one piece actually performs better. That is, it results in more clicks or more emails back or whatever than others. And it was through that process that I really began to hone my methodology. And as I was doing that, I was realizing I wasn't really trying to get a job anymore. I was trying to figure out what kind of a system I'm up against and how can you optimize against that system. I was almost trying to peek behind the curtain and see what was happening to my resume on the other side. So I built in tracking mechanisms, right? Where I knew the moment someone opened the email that was sent for any job, and I wasn't looking at them at the individual level for the most part. I was kind of looking at them in the aggregate. I knew if they read my resume. I knew if they clicked through and looked at my LinkedIn profile. And then certainly I knew if they got back to me and tried to schedule an interview. So if I were running a website or if I had a newsletter, these are all pretty similar to the types of analytics that I would be using to make decisions about the type of content that I run. And that's basically what this was. This was a series of content experiments. The difference was it started out me trying to find a job, and what it ended up being was me learning more and more about just how impersonal this very personal process is.
Wow. Okay, wait, hold on. I want to make sure I'm understanding what you're saying because it's hard to believe that this is true. So you build this robot, which is about as good as what you can do as a person who's clearly very skilled at doing professional level things. You're looking at sending out thousands. You're exponentially increasing your ability to reach out and hit somebody. And even if your robot is, say, oh, I don't know, 85% as good as you, it's still doing work that's comparable to somebody on the lower end of the scale. And even that person's getting nothing back. And so, like you said, the law of large numbers, something should be coming back out that's outside of an automated response. And it's not working well. And I'm struggling to deal with that reality. So as a let me change gears real quick. As a transitioning service member who'd been deployed to war zones, I applied for over 1,000 jobs and got the same thing. I mean, I just tried to outwork the problem. But the reality seems to be that that's not how you outwork this problem. You can't just find jobs that are great fits and pour your heart into a cover letter and expect to get a response. Are you telling me that what I experienced independently of you is right?
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely right. And I think it's something that people all over the country are facing. It's actually the thing that became the most inspiring part of this project for me, because I really started to think about not just myself as I was looking for work. I mean, I happened to be pretty blessed. I was in the middle of my job search, but I still had my job. I've done consulting for a very long time, and so I had this sort of like backup income stream. But the things that were available to me were far and above what are available to someone who's been laid off, or maybe doesn't have quite as much experience as I do, doesn't have the flexibility. It was actually really depressing to think about how tough it is to follow the approach that I think most of us learned as we grew up in our careers, and to know that with the advent of more and more technology and speedier ways of applying to jobs and all these things, that we've actually gotten less and less effective. The job search is just really different than it was when I first started my career. And I think that's the message that has really come from this. We've got to think differently about the job search, and some of the services that are out there that claim to really make it more effective, more efficient, they might actually just be getting in the way of us actually getting a job.
All this time I was trying to tell Pete that his cover letter must have sucked. I was like, come on, man, 1,000 jobs? Your cover letter's got to blow, dude.
So, I mean, I think that that's absolutely right. I think that, you'd be surprised at the number of people who, even after hearing my story and hearing about the sheer volume of jobs that I applied to, that they actually still say, well, maybe you're applying to the wrong jobs. Maybe your cover letter isn't very effective. Maybe your resume isn't tailored the right way. But what they don't really understand is those are all excellent excuses, one by one by one. It's really hard to say that that's the problem, hundreds by hundreds or thousands by thousands, right? There is something else going on here. And I actually went, I wrote that story in Fast Company, but I didn't feel like I'd been able to fully tell the story yet. So I went a little bit further. I went and interviewed a lot of recruiters and hiring managers to find out if my suspicions or what I was seeing in this process, if they were actually true. And boy, was I short-sighted in just how broken this system is. I thought that I had figured out that there was problems with the system. It turns out I had no idea just how many problems there are and just how many things I thought were working that are totally, wild goose chases. I'll give you a couple of examples real quick. There's a very, very big, very well-known online service that I was pretty intrigued by. I was interested in working there, and I applied to a bunch of jobs and never really got anything back. Long after that, I actually reached out and I talked to a recruiter there, and he told me that there were 350,000 people who apply to jobs at his company every year. And I can't remember exactly the size of the company, but let's just say it's definitely less than, say, 5,000. Unless there's like thousands of % turnover in that company, almost nobody is going to get a job out of that 350,000, just like a minute number. Add to that of those 350,000, this guy says, come on, what makes you think I'm going to read 350,000 resumes? And that's a perfectly rational thing to say. Like, I can't ask him to do that. I don't even think that that would be effective. He has to have some sort of a system, a methodology for filtering those resumes down. And they do, and they're called applicant tracking systems. So this is when I said earlier, my bot was talking to other bots, this is basically the algorithm that's sorting people like me out. He also went on to say that they have a focus on hiring people who are referred by their existing staff. So, let's just think about this problem in the larger scale. 350,000 people apply at a company who maybe has, I don't know, I'm just taking a wild guess here, 500 jobs a year. Let's be optimistic at the number of jobs, 1,000 jobs. That of course considers there's probably like a 20% turnover and growth rate. That's super optimistic for your chances. And then add to that they're really only considering hiring people who get a referral from inside. So now, do you want to be a part of that class of 350,000 candidates? Or is there another pathway that you should be thinking about that's going to give you better odds? That's what I was really uncovering in this. And I don't think I'm the very first person to say that networking is the way that you get a job. In fact, I think that most people in the last sort of 5 to 10 years, if they're not actively promoting the use of networking as a way to get a job, they'll at least say, oh yeah, well, of course everyone knows that networking is the way to get a job. But that flies against everything that we know about click here to apply, right? Or websites like Idealist that say 80% of jobs get a qualified candidate in the first 24 hours. They give you this sense of hope that all I have to do is show up and apply and I've got a shot. Well, you do, but you got just as big a shot at winning the lotto.
Jesus.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's pretty dismal. This is hitting home for me right now because I have a son who wants to work in the airline industry. And he's really jazzed about having just sent his resume in to a carrier that we all know and many of us like. And he's excited about the prospect of getting work there. And he's all tuned up. Can't wait to get his interview, and he's ready to suit up and go do it. Like you said, he applied online, and these opportunities to apply online just get inundated, especially if you're a national level company. So given those odds, and since networking is really we're back to basics, or maybe we never left basics, which was that, you went to a good school, you made some friends there, you joined a fraternity, or you played a sport, or you did something that tied you in with people, and you escaped your college or your military or your whatever experience it was. Maybe you joined the Peace Corps with a bunch of people who you had been in the trenches with, and who said, hey, we're going to look out for each other as we establish our professions. So it sounds like we're back to that. Or is there at least now a slightly different path that involves, moving at the speed of technology?
Yeah, I mean, I think that both are true, and it's just a matter of choosing the technology wisely. So, you think about a company like LinkedIn that really started out as a way of establishing who your professional network is. And, I was on LinkedIn pretty early, and I remember back in the day where someone would try to add me to their network, and I would think, I don't know, am I really professionally connected to that person? And I'd be really selective about it, as if it was, if people were going to judge me by the company that I keep. Well, now LinkedIn is like, you just accept everybody. And you see someone on the street and they're pretty well known, and then you go home and you just like try to add them as a connection, as if you know each other or ever work together. Well, I think that's the thing that LinkedIn has become, but they added this other set of features, and that's the job listings. And one of the things I think is dangerous is that we sort of saw LinkedIn developing as a network. And then we saw it add this other thing. We thought, great, it's one-stop shopping. But really those job that, I always talk about the click here to apply now, the instantaneous, I'm going to throw your your LinkedIn profile at them and see what happens. Well, if you think about just how easy that is, you also have to realize that that radically increases the volume of applicants that they're getting. And there's only a couple of things that they can do in response. They can pay less attention to those applicants. They can ignore them completely because they know it takes almost zero investment of your time in order to apply for that. Or they can start applying programmatic filters.
This is Mark Valley. I've got a new podcast called The Live Drop, where I visit the world of intelligence, espionage, surveillance, secrets, tradecraft. I'll talk with spies about their stories of international intrigue. Sometimes I'll even talk with the actors who played them as well. Check it out at markvalley.com. It's The Live Drop.
To people on their way in and say, I'm only interested in people who have this specific educational background, who've worked for these specific companies, and so on and so forth. Those are the chosen few. So unless, in your example, your son's applying to an airline, unless he's got the kind of background that guarantees he's going to be one of the chosen few, he's got to choose another path. And it turns out LinkedIn actually still can help him. It's going to be a matter of thinking about all of the different people that he knows and taking a look and seeing who the second level connection or the third level connection is at the company that he wants to be at, and in reality, in the division that he wants to work for. And that's his point of entry. It takes a lot more work. It's manual labor, but it's the kind of specialized approach that really is going to get this done, because at least in my experience, and of course this is for a very specific type of job, type of company, but in my experience, brute force just doesn't work. Patience barely works.
Wow. That's a heavy message. So, okay, let me ask you this. I'll just take the service member side of things, because this is one of the problems. You come back from to lead 40 people is nothing in the military, and to go through a number of leadership courses, highly trained, secondary degrees oftentimes. You come back and you don't have a network with a second or third connection quite often, because you've been doing other stuff. How does someone with legitimate skill come in, and if patience barely works, patience with very few contacts is even a long shot. How do we, in a world where 22 veterans a day kill themselves, how do we help these folks out and help them flatten the curve so they can get a network that will support them finding work that is fulfilling?
Yeah, this is an incredibly important question. I've been lucky enough to work for a very long time with a handful of teams in Department of Defense, Army, and Navy in particular. And it honestly, the experience that I had, particularly seeing young people in the military, it fundamentally changed what I thought about when I was considering veterans, when I was considering hiring people who'd served in the military. Number one, I'll just say that I've never seen any system anywhere, and I would actually say this is probably true even of our university system. I've never seen any system anywhere that is as good at turning out people with a consistent level of experience, with the ability to pivot and learn new skills, and with a level of commitment to mission and vision. I've just never seen that. The United States military in all of its forms is really a sight to behold that very, very few civilians get the opportunity to see behind the scenes. And that's been really important to me. But I tell you, some of the most difficult pieces of that, it's not just having a limited network or a network that's focused heavily on other members of the military, but it's that so much of that experience doesn't translate over, right? So I'm looking at executive level positions, but if you have someone who's coming out of a short career in the military, they may not have a whole lot of experience to translate over into management speak. So how do you make that meaningful to a civilian employer? How do you explain that an infantryman has skills that can be useful in, say, sales, right? I mean, the things that we as civilians think about veterans, the types of skills that they have, we just don't have a very good language for understanding how that stuff translates over. One of the things that I will say is encouraging to me, and I haven't experienced them directly, and I haven't spent a lot of time with them, but I do hear increasingly about a lot of transitional programs for people. A very good friend of mine just told me in the last couple of weeks he's going through a program called GPS. He's going to be retiring in about a year. And this is the stuff that they focus on. They focus on helping to translate the type of experience that you have into civilian language, how to get rid of all of the acronyms, how to talk about what the skills that you have, what they look like in a civilian context when you strip away all of the surrounding military context. And the thing that made me the happiest, I actually texted with him just today to ask him this question. They put a huge emphasis on networking, on not relying on just applying to a job on a website, but instead going and finding someone who works there that you know, or someone who you know who knows someone who works there, and doing the hard work of making your way in from that side door. I think that that's the best advice that we can give.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. There are a lot of people that will help you translate your resume, and it might shock a lot of people to know that the ratio of combatants to combat support is, let's say on the low side, it's 10-1. There's a whole lot more people doing civilian type jobs, because you think about what a military does. It's got operations, it's got logistics, it's got sales, it's got all these different things that are going on. And most people during most of their career do those things. Because even those 1 out of 10 or 1 out of really 15, combatants to non-combatants, that one rotates back and they do operations, they do training. I mean, the military can train people, like you've seen that through your experiences. These folks get trained up, so you learn how to build curricula and all these kind of things. So it is definitely a perception that we require a lot of soup to nuts retraining on our skill set, when really a lot of times, like I used to work at a computer-based company, and they were proud of their training, and I was like, I'd love to work in here with you guys and help you out. And they're like, well, you're really not qualified. I'm like, I'm a master instructor with over 1,000 hours on the platform in the Army world teaching advanced classes. And there's no way I'm not qualified. There's no way. It's not possible. That's from the inside. So the external piece, that's really, really a challenge.
My biggest question, I think what everybody wants to know is what, based on what you've learned here, do you think that you can go back and somehow build a bot that will win the Clone Wars? Can you build a bot that will break through?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. Since I wrote the article, a lot of stuff has happened. I've been introduced to a lot of people who grabbed onto different parts of the story. And one portion of the population of people I've been talking to ask that exact thing. Well, maybe if we just tried harder and built out new features, or, expanded the parameters or any of these things. And I think, pragmatically speaking, get down to nuts and bolts, sure, this thing could be way more effective. I could definitely see certain things being tweaked to make it better. But I don't think they actually change the root problem. I don't think that they get at that root problem. And to me, that's the thing that's the most important. And in fact, it's the thing that I've been spending a lot of time with employers talking about over the last few months, is just thinking differently about the implications about when we introduce technology into this process on both sides, right? So, I was saying earlier that, companies have thousands, tens, or hundreds of thousands of applicants. So they need to build in technology to address that. On the other side, we as applicants have access to more job openings than we've ever had before. They're listed on a million websites, often the same job listed in lots of different places. And it's easier than ever to apply. And so we're sort of in it's almost a war of attrition, right? Where both sides it's like mutual escalation, where both sides are bringing more and more technology to the table. And it turns out every time one side introduces new technology, the other side hears a lot of noise. And they respond to that noise with more filtration or with something that handles more volume, a bigger brute force machine. I decided I don't really want to do that anymore. I want to get people to understand, right, that like if you're a corporation that's using an applicant tracking system, cool. You need to know what that's doing to your numbers. You need to know that that's probably dramatically increasing the noise that you'll hear. And the likelihood that you're going to find someone, that needle in a haystack, someone who's really unique, it almost guarantees you won't do that. You're going to be looking for people who fit a particular set of variables, and you'll find them, and they'll probably be okay as long as the variables that you choose were not terrible. But that's not the business that I'm in. It's not the business I want to be in, and it's not the way that most employers see themselves selecting people. They like to think of themselves as finding the very best and the very brightest. And most of us can agree that you can't find the very best and the very brightest by simply selecting a school and a couple of competitors that they might have worked for. There's got to be something else in there. And so that's the thing that I'm interested in figuring out, not only how I as an individual can be found that way, but also how I can coach employers into thinking differently about how you discover those things. And it's not always a failure. I mean, certainly plenty of really good people have been found that way, and they'll continue to be found that way. But those of us who aren't the chosen few that I said earlier, and certainly, Pete, to your point, people coming in with a systemic disadvantage, right? I wouldn't necessarily put myself alongside service members, but I do think that trying to transition from the nonprofit world to the tech sector, it's got to be a lot like trying to transition from the military to specific civilian industries. If they don't have the exact same title or the same type of job, you really have to convince people. You got an uphill climb to convince people that you can do this thing, even though all of your experience looks really different than the experience of the people that they're considering for those roles.
Yeah. You're saying a lot of really powerful and important words there, because
I wanted to take a second out of the show and talk to you guys about our sponsor, WeFixYourScript.com. What I love about these guys is they're encouraging you, just like John, Mark, and I, to create something. If you think screenwriting is your thing, or if you've got a script that you're kind of stuck on, this is what you do. You don't got to buy anything. Just give these guys a call. Schedule a 15-minute consultation for free. It's WeFixYourScript.com. I highly encourage you guys to support these guys. Reach out to us. Reach out to them. Reach out to WeFixYourScript.com.
I know that the CEO of Fill in the Blank Company doesn't want to spend tens of thousands of dollars on technology to not find the right people. I mean, really, that's what you're doing. You're spending a lot of money to build a filter so that you can get the same incestuous group of people that you're already getting. And here's the problem with all of that. If employee engagement is 70 to 80+%, disengagement, I should say, and that's self-reported by employees. If most, like the vast majority of employees are not engaged at work, could be that the hiring process is partly to blame for that. There has to be a correlation there. You're right. How many companies think, oh yeah, we're terrible at hiring people. We hire the worst people all the time. We're terrible at it. We're terrible. They look around with their hands up. Nobody says that. They all think they found the right person. Meanwhile, there's 300,000 people going, damn it, I wish I would have had, and desperation sets in. And the second you get possibly your name called, if you get called from that line, what are the odds that you're going to put on a real face? You're like, here's my one shot. And it's a much more of a performance rather than an actual representation of who you are, because you're just so relieved to get behind the velvet rope.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's exactly right. And, some people that read my story or who I've talked to have really sort of pushed me and said, like, well, maybe you're just not a very good candidate, or maybe you're just, applying to the wrong jobs, or you have too high aspirations. Well, that's entirely possible. Again, one by one by one. But the thing that's been really interesting to me is for all of the companies that I applied to, and especially those big ones who totally gave me radio silence, there have been a lot of those big companies who've asked me to come and speak, or who've asked me for some of my consulting time. And it's like, you know what, guys? Like, if you'd actually just paid attention to my resume, you could have gotten this a lot cheaper. You could have had me full time instead of piping me in for an hour, or I run out to your office and you got to feed me lunch while I, answer some questions from your executive team. The reality is I am totally not unique. There's a lot of folks out there who are self-selecting and saying, I'm really interested in this company, and I think I can do that job, and I think that this is a great fit. And what my message is ultimately getting at is, if that's the case, don't apply. The worst thing that you could do is spend your time applying through the normal channels. Instead, you got to find those side doors that are going to really give you a chance to get in front of these folks and let them see what you're made of. I had the chance to be published in Fast Company, and so that gave me a lot of visibility. But what are you going to do? What if you're trying to be seen? If you're trying to get a chance to talk to these folks, are you going to hit the click here to apply now button, or are you going to try and reach out to someone who maybe you're connected through your brother or sister-in-law, or someone that you used to work with, and say, can I just take you out for coffee and talk to you for a half hour and learn more about your company, and maybe tell you a little bit about what I'm looking for, and see if there's some connection here. It's way more manual labor, but it's infinitely more effective.
It sounds also like it's infinitely more interesting. So
yeah, I mean, the number of discoveries that I've made through sitting down with interesting people is it's far and away above the number of times that I've applied to a job and it's led to some interesting conversations, whether or not it led to a job. Right? I mean, I've actually made friends over the last few months that I never would have met in a million years if it weren't for the fact that I dedicated a portion of my time to networking for the purposes of finding a job. And now that's shifted a little bit. I'm still out there looking for a job, but now I'm just looking for more companies where I can, solve interesting problems with them for a little while. It's been a really exciting shift from just looking at the job boards every day.
Yeah.
That's terrific. Let me say that I'm glad that you went that direction. I'm glad that these things worked out for you, because you talked about the real root problem, and I'm almost starting to fear that the real root problem is that we have a population that, like you, like Pete, is overqualified for the collective product that we're turning out. In other words, we have guys who have graduate degrees, guys who qualify for CMO level positions, who aren't getting those gigs because there aren't enough of those gigs. But it doesn't sound like that's necessarily the case. It's just that the toolbox is.
Yeah, no, I mean, you're definitely right in that there's a pyramid, right? And the jobs that everybody aspires to, there's the fewest of those. So there's definitely like a supply and demand problem there. But I also think, and anyone who's hired a lot of people will sort of share in my frustration with this, we do a really bad job of describing what a job is. Titles are often misleading. Same title from one company to the next can be radically different. And they all say, has to have, you got to be good with Microsoft Office.
Yes, I was waiting for that. Yes.
What the hell does that mean? What does that mean?
And a motivated self-starter.
Of course.
Yeah.
But the reality is, if I tried to describe every job that I've ever had, it would sound more like you got to be able to figure out how to solve problems without the tools necessary and under a level of urgency that's totally unrealistic, and never actually be encouraged for the level of work that you do. I mean, it's like we just can't just describe jobs the way that they are in real life. We try to come up with a task list that describes it, and it's really tough. We try to find certain types of experience that we think means that someone can be successful. And you know what we do when we come up with that list? We just describe ourselves, and that's the thing that I think a lot of organizations really struggle with. They're getting the same types of people in the same types of jobs, but what they're not often getting is problem solvers, people who think differently. It's so cliche, but thinking outside of the box. Well, if you want to think outside of the box, then stop hiring people from the box.
Right. Yeah. I was just thinking how funny it is on every job description ever. It talks about having good communication skills, and how ironic that is from the poor communication skills of you can't even communicate your job with me, and I'm going to send you a message and you're not going to respond back. So you expect me to have these good communication skills in this job, but really that's not even a real thing. Like who's going to describe what that is?
And then you go and look at a vice president of communications, and it doesn't say good communication skills. It says excellent communication skills. Well, shouldn't we have just assumed that? Did you really have to waste those keystrokes for that instead of talking about the very specific types of skills that you got to have? But that just goes to show like just how difficult it is to write a job description, and just how loosely we actually adhere to those job descriptions. And don't get me started on the difference between certain types of people who will look at a job and see that they don't actually qualify for it, but put in anyway. And I put myself in this class. Like I don't really care about the years experience, because it's typically too few or too many. All of these things. I know that the person who wrote this thing is just sort of making some stuff up. But I also know that there's a whole lot of people out there who see that it requires 5 to 7 years experience, and they've got 4, and they don't even try. And that's the gap that I think is really problematic here, where some people think that the application process and job descriptions and the way that Monster.com coaches you into doing it, that there's some sort of like truth with a capital T to that. Whereas the rest of us who've sort of peeked behind the scenes, we realize that like everybody's just inventing this as they go. And there are some big corporations who are way better at it. But you know what? They throw all the rules out the window when one of their staff recommends someone. That's the stuff where we really need to be able to coach people into understanding the nuance of this system that seems so structured, but it's really just kind of a free-for-all.
The next person I meet that can admit to me that their company job descriptions never have a cut and paste error will be the first person I meet that says that. It's constant that you're like, oh, never mind that. Oops, sorry. That's not really part of the job. Every single person I've ever asked about that has always said, yeah, we do that regularly where we make a mistake.
Well, and the funny thing is, since my article came out, I've gone back and talked to a bunch of friends who read it and came back, and they're like, great job, Captain Obvious. You let everyone know that the way to get a job is through networking. I've never gotten a job anyway other than networking. And I'm like, okay, well, I totally appreciate how true that is, but that flies in the face of what all of the big, job sites are telling us. And so I just want to reconcile that. I just want to get to a place where we're not telling, people who are, who are coming out of the military or who are trying to transition from one industry to the next, or who are starting their careers for the first time, that it's as easy as clicking a button, because it's just more complicated than that.
No, it for sure is. So everybody knows we're talking to Robert Coombs. You can look him up on LinkedIn. It's real easy to find him. You can look him up under Robert Coombs.
But we're talking about his LinkedIn article. And so we'll put also a link to your LinkedIn article when we post the show, because everybody should read that. It's not only is it fascinating that we've been talking about it, but it is a really compelling article and very well written and a fun read.
I really appreciate it, guys. And maybe by the time this comes out, it's not out just yet. I also did a TEDx talk, and I'd love to point people in that direction, because it's got all sorts of stories like I said earlier, from recruiters and hiring managers. And I think it just tells like sort of the flip side of the story. The Fast Company article talks about what it's like being a candidate with a machine gun application approach. And the TEDx talk tells a little bit about what it's like for the recruiters who have bullets flying over their heads, so to speak. I think this is an interesting story on both sides.
Well, this show will be up well after that as well, too. So there's a TEDx talk with Robert Coombs' stuff. Just hit me if you can't find it, Pete A. Turner on Twitter, or grab John
LG69.
Grab us there, and we'll direct you to Robert's stuff if you can't find it. Always feel free to talk to us about things. We'll connect you with Robert. I'm sure he's interested in talking to you guys too. And
absolutely,
this is how we start to identify these problems and try to work around it. But maybe the next robot, Robert, it sends out a meeting request like, "Hey, I can't seem to find a job through the front door, so I'd love to set up a coffee request with you, CEO or HR chief or whatever it's going to be." And maybe that's the answer is to start to use that. Like, I've got this negative value. If then, now what? Now we're going to invite people to coffee from within the company, and maybe there's a product there.
I think that you guys have exactly the right sort of approach to problem solving. The question is, what is the goal, and is it just ramping up applications? Is it just ramping up invites? Or is it actually sitting down and having people talk to people? I think that's the reason this is an interesting story, is because, I like to think of myself as a technologist, and what I actually end up advocating for is getting that stuff out of the way. I'm advocating for coffee.
Yes. Well, I'd also like to see that bot that you built applied differently. And instead of maybe looking for CMO jobs or jobs at technology companies, maybe you build the wingman.
The wingman.
Oh, the ladies.
The wingman.
For the ladies.
Go out there and talk to as many ladies as you can, and that would be a pretty different keyword search.
It would be. I tell you what, online dating is its own beast. I have an article that's still inside of me talking about my own approach to online dating, which was almost what an economist would do if you were introduced to online dating for the first time ever. I'd love to come back and talk to you guys about that someday.
I actually had a system that was working pretty good. I took $20 down to the corner and I gave it to an old bum, and I said, "Kick me in the balls. I'll be back next month." And that's what I kept doing until I kept going down there, because that's about the same amount of success that I could get.
Same level of effectiveness.
Yeah, like, I don't need these $20, and you may as well just, yep, that's what I needed. Oh, Jesus. And then.
So dating looks different for me, I think, than it did for you. I do have to say I'm really, really excited that in just the last few weeks, I've gotten engaged to my fiance. We met online, and now that I actually have the conclusion to the story, I think I'm going to go out. My next article is talking about how I went on 40 dates in 30 days and met the love of my life.
Now that's the kind of story.
Terrific.
Yeah, we love that.
Yes. Let's just book that appointment right now.
We do want to hear that story.
I look forward to telling you guys.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Well, hey, we're coming in the home stretch. I do want to say thank you for the article was great. The subject matter is terrific. I appreciate you coming back to the root of human contact, which is, go sit down with somebody, have an interesting conversation, do it over coffee, do it face to face. And congratulations on your engagement. This has been great.
I really appreciate you guys, and by all means, to the audience, let me know what you think. Share the article, take me to task on things you disagree with, and tell your friends about the stuff that you liked about this.
Do you want people to hit you up on Twitter? Do you want people to reach out to you on LinkedIn? I just sent you a LinkedIn request, by the way, so that we can be peripherally linked in, as you described at the beginning of the show. But I don't care about that. I think we're going to make it better than that.
Now, we're already closer than most of the people that are in my network. By all means, everyone who's listening to the Break It Down show should reach out to me on LinkedIn hit me on Twitter. I'm Robert1ER. That's Oneer. And like I said, I just love to hear what people think about this story. And the more that it gets shared, the more fun that I have talking to different people as we learn about it.